There are 7 families of turtles in Florida, 26 different species, 14 additional subspecies. I love and know them all. And we're just going to look really at the families, not at all the different species, but the 7 different families of turtles. Alphabetically, Chelonidae are the hard-shelled sea turtles. We have 4 species. That was back in Tortugas, and loggerheads are our only sea turtle that are not endangered. They're threatened. Their numbers, this was only up to 2010, but we're declining around 30 to 35,000 a year. We'll move on down to the Chelydridae, the snapping turtles. You know, when you talk to a person in this country or even in the world about snakes or turtles, the uninformed person or the fear-based person typically assumes that every snake they see is a cottonmouth and every turtle they see is a snapper. And that's just simply not true. But snapping turtles are great. But yeah, and also we do not have alligator snapping turtles south of the Swanee River. So it's in Central and South Florida, we have the common snapping turtle and the Florida snapping turtle. Dermochelidae, I'm gonna have to zoom out a little bit, but these are basically the leatherback, the only single species in this family. Very, very cool, very few nesting in Florida. The next family is Amididae. Amidid turtles are the pond, box, and water turtles. And there are 11 species. And interestingly enough, the Diamondback Terrapin occurs in this family. So very interesting. I gotta show you this. I love how kids love turtles. We were doing a tour of the Swanee River one year where we went from Georgia down to the Gulf of Mexico, and all these kids, I had this Swanee River cooter, and these kids were just loving it. I love how much kids love turtles. It's a great thing. It's a great way to get into conservation. Family Conosternidae. These are the mud and musk turtles, and they're 4 species. And what's really cool about these guys is they're extremely small, and they call them the bottom walkers. They literally mostly walk along the bottom as opposed to swim. And so very, very cool, very interesting little guys. And they're primarily molluscivores. They'll eat freshwater snails. They have very strong, this is a little stink pot, super cute. They're just adorable. Family Testudinae, the tortoises, we only have 1 species in Florida, the gopher tortoise, Gopherus polyphemus. We do have one in care right now at Pelican Harbor, and 1% of our patients are reptiles, primarily turtles, freshwater turtles, and a few box and land turtles. Family Trionychidae, the soft shell turtles. We have 3 species of soft shells in Florida, and really interesting, and actually much more aggressive than a snapping turtle. Although they don't have a hard shell on the outside, they do have, like us, we have ribs on the inside. They have extremely long necks, and my professor, Dr. Peter Malin, actually changed their Latin name based on the phylogenetic history of the species. It used to be Trionyx something, and he changed it to Apolloni ferox. And ferox means ferocious in Latin, and they truly are ferocious. They have really sharp claws, really long necks, and the world record in Florida is 110 pounds. And they take down small birds, alligators, small alligators. They're really cool turtles, and yeah, a lot more to be concerned about than a snapping turtle. There's a big female soft shell. The babies are adorable. And now my favorite turtle, the Diamondback Terrapin. Just a really remarkable, very, very rare turtle. Most people have never seen or heard of this species. And Hannah, please chime in if I'm going too fast or if the sound cuts out. What do Diamondback Terrapins have in common with yellow-bellied sea snakes, American crocodiles, marine iguanas, and sea turtles? They're not just all reptiles, they're all marine reptiles. And they're not just all marine reptiles, they all have a mechanism to excrete excess sodium. So with the marine iguanas, they blow it out their nose. The sea turtles, they do those copious, vicious tears where they actually cry and the salt comes out. It's called the lacrimal salt gland, and Diamondback terrapins actually possess this lacrimal salt gland to excrete excess sodium from the harsh marine environment. And typically they're found in a linear range. I'll go ahead and jump down here to this slide. Diamondback terrapins have a linear range from Cape Cod all the way down to Key West and the Marquesas, one of my favorite places, amazing, and to southern Texas. And their range is very, very narrow, only occurring in salt marsh and mangrove habitats. So a really, really cool turtle. We actually have 7 subspecies in the country and 5 within Florida. This map is not, the Centrata actually extends down into Florida here. And I'm going to zoom out a little bit just because some of these slides are a little bit full. So in Florida, we have the Carolina Diamondback Terrapin, the East Coast Diamondback Terrapin, the Upper Keys Mangrove Terrapin, the Lower Keys Mangrove Terrapin, and some are separating these and some are lumping them, and they're going more to lumping them now. The Ornate Diamondback Terrapin, very beautiful, and has the largest range in Florida from Collier County all the way up to the Panhandle. And then the Mississippi Diamondback Terrapin. Another cool thing about terrapins is, like many bird species and many turtle species, is they're sexually dimorphic, meaning that one sex looks markedly different than the other. And in the Chelonian world, in the turtle world, the females are bigger. And why do you think the females would be bigger? They can lay more eggs, higher fecundity. So very, very interesting. So Joyce is asking, are they fresh or saltwater turtles? Are they in the Everglades? So they're a euryhaline turtle, which means they can live in brackish water. They really don't do well in fresh water. They're really euryhalines in brackish water. So estuaries and bays. But typically a lot of the saltwater, saltwater is 32 parts per thousand, I believe, 32 parts per million. 32 parts per one of those, but they occur in hypersaline environments. Their clutch sizes range around 8 to 12, and we'll talk about that a little later, Joyce. But sexually dimorphic, and the males are about a third their size, and we'll talk about a major threat to the males for that reason. These are the heads of the male and the female, and this species, they are molluscivores, like the connocernids, and so they eat snails, almost exclusively snails. The hatchlings, all reptiles, when they hatch, have a little egg tooth right here. And this egg tooth is actually for breaking out of the egg. Very, very cool. And a lot of reptiles have temperature-dependent sexual discrimination, meaning, and particularly for turtles, above a certain temperature, you get all males, and below a certain temperature, you get all females. So very interesting stuff. And huge implications for climate change, et cetera. Diamondback terrapins are also one of the only turtles to have these tubercles on their carapace. And I love the number 13. I was born on the 13th. My brother Steve was born on the 13th. And but virtually all turtles in the world have 13 major scutes on their carapace. These are the marginal scutes along the edge. But if you count the vertebral or central scutes and the costal scutes, there are 13. I love the number 13. You know, a lot of us, or at least I think a lot of us had like a defining moment in our life where something kind of was a road, like a crossroads that can change your life forever. And for me, I was out of college. I didn't really have a job that I loved. I was trying to find my way in the world in St. Petersburg. And one day, in a moment of clarity, a rare moment of clarity, I got the inspiration to write this article about Diamondback terrapins. And although the name is very strange, it's very apt. And so this was for the local newspaper there called Tampa Bay Soundings, all about the environment, what's happening in Tampa Bay and the watershed and everything. And so the article was called From Terrapin Stew to Terrapin Who, the Little Turtle the World Forgot. And truly, it's very sad that 100 years ago, everyone in your family, every one of your of your ancestors knew, if they lived along the East Coast or the Gulf Coast of this country, they knew what a terrapin was, and they ate them. And today, if you go to a lot of state parks or national parks and ask a biologist or a ranger, sometimes they'll say, tarpon? Bird? What are you talking about? A lot of people just don't know what this turtle is, and it's a shame that we've forgotten about them. These are some terrapin stew recipes. This is actually a graph from, I'm going to zoom out just a tiny bit. So this is actually from the state of Maryland. And you know, the Maryland, I think their mascot is the Maryland Terrapins. So from one state, these are their harvest records in kilograms And terrapins, the females weigh about 1 kilogram. The males weigh about 300 to 400 kilograms. So this is 40,000 animal turtles taken out of the wild, harvested in 1 year, around 1893 or so. But back in the 1880s, slaves used to complain about being fed too many terrapins and getting bored of the meat. But you see, they took a lot out of the wild in this one state of Maryland, and then all of a sudden they surpassed the carrying capacity, and the population crashed down to almost nothing, almost locally extinct, down to almost nothing. So then the US government stepped in and they subsidized terrapin farms, just the way they subsidize dairy and meat today. And these are actually a terrapin farm in the Carolinas. But the other thing is around, I believe Prohibition was like in the 30s or so, right? I'm not good with that part of history. But at one point, it became the most expensive meat in the history of the world. And it was only being served on the trains going to New York. And only the rich upper class could have terrapins, could have terrapin stew. And brandy was a chief ingredient in it. So that was kind of hard in Prohibition. But some of the current threats to diamondback terrapins are obviously, there are some graphic slides. If you have any children, it's unfortunately a harsh reality of it all. But this is an adult female mangrove terrapin. Look at her blue head and her little black spots. This was on mile marker 111 on 18-mile stretch going into Key Largo a few years ago. These are some hatchlings that got roadkill. So roadkill is a big issue. Blue crab traps are probably the single largest cause of localized extinctions of diamondback terrapins in this country. And diamondback terrapins only occur in this country, nowhere else in the world. This species is only here. They share the same habitat preference of blue crabs, basically shallow nearshore environments of mangrove or salt marsh environments. So they're air-breathing reptiles, so they go in the traps and they drown. This is one single trap. I think this is in South Carolina, one single trap, and that's well over 50 dead terrapins. The females are only vulnerable to drowning in traps during when they're juveniles, because once they reach a certain size, they're too large. And so the females, once they're a couple of years old, 4 or 5 years old, they're safe and they will never drown in a terrapin trap. But the males, throughout their entire life cycle, are vulnerable to entering these traps and drowning. And since they have very, very narrow home ranges, unlike sea turtles, they have very small, tight home ranges. A single trap or several traps in an area can wipe out a whole population in a couple of years. So blue crab traps are the main issue for terrapin extinctions and localized extinctions, and have been for decades. These were 31 dead. This is actually about 15 or 16 of 31 dead terrapins that came from a trap at Alafaya Bank in Tampa Bay. When I was in college at Edgar College, Dr. Malin, who used to be the curator of herpetology at the University of Florida, he got me in with the Smithsonian in DC. And so the Smithsonian sent us on loan these terrapins. So the one in the middle is a dead adult female that was killed by a raccoon from my study site. But there were 31 dead male shells. And so the Smithsonian mailed them to Dr. Malin at Edgar College. I took them home, measured them, and took them and to basically look at their size classes. And they were all basically adult males. There were a few sub-adult females to use in my report. But have you ever heard that excuse, the dog ate my homework? This was the strangest, oddest thing. It was Halloween in 1998. Halloween 1998. And it was a nice temperature outside, so we had the front door open in Gulfport, Florida, right there on Boca Ciega Bay. And I had all these Smithsonian turtles in the living room, over in the corner. And this crazy dog ran into our home. It was a large Irish wolfhound. Ran into our home, ran over to the Smithsonian turtles and grabbed one and immediately ran out the door. And so I chased it down the street. I couldn't get to it. He got away. I never found the turtle, and I had to tell the Smithsonian that a dog ate my homework, and they were kind of upset. So I sent them some other terrapins that had died from predation of raccoons, but that was kind of interesting. So yeah, raccoons not only eat the eggs, they raid nests and eat the eggs. They also kill the adults. This is female number 8. The first time I ever went to the study site in Tampa Bay, me and 2 other students canoed out there, and we went out. It's actually a national wildlife refuge, a bird rookery. At the time, the 4th largest bird colony in Florida, 18 different species, and we found 8 terrapins, photographed them. We didn't mark them or process them that day because we didn't have a permit yet. We were doing just an exploratory trip with permission from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and Florida Coastal Island Sanctuaries, who I've been out there with before. But apparently, although I work with terrapins in the Florida Keys, a raccoon followed my scent to this female and killed her. And so after this happened, we immediately began a protocol that anytime we processed a terrapin, regardless of catching it on land or in the water, land meaning the intertidal zone of a mangrove forest, we would always release them in the water so they would lose the scent and the raccoons couldn't find them. But raccoons are one of the only animals to really, other than cockroaches, the insect, to really thrive with humans. And so while many other species have declined, raccoons have thrived, and now there's an imbalance of raccoons, other than in extreme southern South Florida, where the pythons now are eating all the mammals, and it's hard to find a raccoon or a marsh rabbit or any small mammal on Main Park Road in the Southern Everglades. You have to go north of 75 to find them. So another terrapin, and they didn't even eat it. They just broke their legs and gnawed and cut their neck, but that was it. Another predator, this is a more natural relationship, is the bald eagle. And this is a photo, I believe, from Dr. Brian Mealy, who was at the Bachelor Bird of Prey Center. But this is, I believe, about almost 10 or so terrapins in Florida Bay in a bald eagle nest. So it's pretty interesting that our bald eagles like to dine on terrapins, and they do occur in high densities in their naturally and healthy ecosystem, and there are in high densities in Florida Bay because there's no commercial crabbing allowed there or fishing allowed there. Back in and Hannah, feel free to interrupt me if there's a question that's relevant to what we're talking about, or we can wait till the end. This was back in the 90s when I was in college at Eckerd College again. So Dr. Malin shared this report with me, Fish and Wildlife Service, Florida Fish and Wildlife Service. They had 18 or 20 biologists, PhDs, that did an assessment of Florida's vertebrate species. And they looked at some of the most endangered and critically endangered and even extinct, because this woodpecker that was last seen in 1958. This paper came out in 1995 or 6 or 7 or so. And so these biologists ranked an extinct species and a critically endangered species where we only had 30 or 40 of back in the 90s with these bioscores. And you can see the bioscore for this extinct species, Ivory woodpecker, was 51, and it was 42 for the Florida panther and 33 for the black bear, but the terrapins were all 34, 32, 30. They were up in there with extinct and critically endangered species, and the action score, meaning the state of Florida should take action to conserve and preserve this species, were the highest action scores of all of the species sampled. And to this day, they have not attained the protection they deserve. FWC is working on that, and we'll talk about that near the end. But they were listed as a non-listed imperiled species, and they truly are imperiled. And it's very good luck finding one unless you're with a terrapin biologist, because they're very hard to find. And if you've seen one, I'd love to hear about it. It's really great and exciting to see them. So again, non-listed imperiled species. Now this was done a few years ago, this last, on FNA, the Florida Natural Areas Inventory, the mangrove terrapin down in the lower Keys, the mangrove Melatonis terrapin rhizophararum is listed as rare. And then FCREPA, the Florida Committee on Rare and Endangered Species, also lists the mangrove terrapin as rare. IUCN lists them as threatened. Some of this might have changed, but typically it's, yeah. going in the other way. Again, my 3 primary study sites, Tampa Bay. I won't list the name of the island because some people like to, might go there and take them. And so I won't list the names of the islands, but yeah, I marked over 600 terrapins through these 3 study sites, primarily about 150 in Tampa Bay area and over almost 400 here in Crystal River, about 30 in the Keys. And beyond that, we have a study site in Miami for nesting for hatchling mangrove terrapins, and Indian River, about 20 or 30 there. This was the primary island, and my heart is at this island. I spent many hundreds and thousands of hours at this island, exploring every corner. And it's kind of a place where I lost and found myself many times. But I'll always love this place, and it's very near Ecker College and near the Sunshine Skyway. But this was the first day we went out there, and we found them. This one's molting, that's why it doesn't look so pretty. But the ornate Diamondback terrapin, very beautiful and very ornate. These are adult females. These are some islands off of Citrus County, and they're way out in the Gulf. You have to travel almost 10 miles by boat from the landing in Crystal River to get to them. And this is the northernmost reach for mangroves on the west coast of Florida. Citrus County is probably my favorite county in Florida. They call it the Springs Coast. There's several magnitude 3 or 4 springs just pumping out major volumes of beautiful water out to the bay, and there's scallops and Kemp's Ridley sea turtles and amazing bird rookeries, remarkable bird rookeries, and the highest density of terrapins I've ever seen there, and very healthy. Because the water's so shallow there, I would have to drive airboats. We use chum in the traps, and we'll talk about the traps in a minute. These are blue crab traps. Airboat. This was one of the sites down in the Keys, outside the national park, but in Monroe County. And this is my good friend Turtle Bob, a really remarkable man. And he had quite a large turtle collection at his place called the Turtle Burrow up in Ocala, up near Marion County, Florida. He's a U.S. postal worker, but he never bought or sold a turtle. He just loved turtles and always provided a home for any that needed a home, but never sold or bought them. But he helped me on many of the trips. And that's an adult female and adult male mangrove terrapin. That's a very, very rare thing, an adult male mangrove terrapin from Monroe County. Very, very rare. This is underneath the dock at one of the places we were working at, and the terrapins were hanging out under the dock, and so I put my hand down there and I was grabbing them out, and I was so excited because there's nowhere in the mainland Monroe in this country that you can find a terrapin like this. Very, very, very hard. And especially a dozen of them. And this is in Monroe County, even different. So, I was reaching under the dock to get them out so we could mark them and process them. And we marked 38 at that site. And it's hard to see because it's a little dark, but this is I'm gonna zoom in a little bit. I'm gonna lighten my screen, and that might help a little bit too. But this is an adult mangrove water snake, and they're non-venomous. And I love snakes, but it's just kind of, you don't want to be startled by a snake and put your hand in a snake's mouth. But there's a terrapin there basking, hanging out. The snake a little bit closer. So again, a lot of the sites were wildlife refuges, and the one thing I will share about terrapins is, because of all the threats, because of the blue crab traps and the fire ant predation and the raccoon predation and the coastal armoring and the habitat fragmentation and the roadkill mortality, the very best place to find a terrapin population is an island. And even better if the island has a lagoon. Even better if there is a shallow grass flat surrounding the island that prohibits commercial blue crab activity or even entry by most people. And then lastly, if there's a bird rookery, there are terrapins. And we do have bird rookeries here in Biscayne Bay, but we don't have bird rookeries with the lagoon that don't have the blue crab trap activity. So Diamondback terrapins are locally extinct from northern Biscayne Bay. You can only find them in a very small part of southern Biscayne Bay in very small numbers. Being at the bird colonies is so great to see black-necked stilts and frigate birds and white pelicans. This is Alphi Bank in Tampa Bay. These spoonbills and frigate birds, just amazing. So sampling methods, how did I catch these rare turtles? So Dr. Roger Wood, who's kind of like my mentor with terrapin research, who I met when I was 18 years old, like 1990, quite a ways back in Key West. He taught me, you walk around in the black mangrove forest. They prefer black mangroves to red mangroves. And you just look for them. And it's definitely better. If you can see this, you can see right now it's dry, right? You see this is the water level. This is the high tide mark. So during extreme high tides around the full moon, the turtles, the terrapins, get a lot more access to the interiors of these bird nesting rookeries, these mangrove islands. And because birds practice siblicide, in that the baby birds will push bird eggs hatch in different days. So the first bird that hatches on day 1 picks on the bird that hatches on day 2 and 3 or 4 and 5. So eventually there's spatial competition and resource competition in the nest, and the older bird will push the baby birds out of the nest and they will fall to the forest floor and die. Typically they'll die. That's natural order siblicide at bird rookeries in the wild. But basically, since terrapins are molluscivores, they feed on these marine snails, Melampus snails, Atlantic rib mussels, marsh periwinkles. They also will eat fiddler crabs. Fiddler crabs are harder to catch than a snail, but easier than a fish, right? And so when these birds fall and die, they create this, the nutrition from that as they decompose, boosts the snail population. And it's kind of a cycle, the circle of life. And so the terrapins really love to eat the snails that are climbing on these nematophores of the black mangroves. This is actually a adult female that's kind of buried in the mud, and she thinks she's hiding, but I can see her. But it's really fun to find them out there when they're buried in the mud, or even when they're so this girl, she's got her head under the turtle grass. You can't see me, but you can see her, right? So it's just so cool one of my favorite things in the world, literally, is to walk through a black mangrove island and find mangrove terrapins, diamondback terrapins. I love sea beans too, those of you that know me, but just really cool. And I'd be happy to take anybody that wants out on a terrapin survey at some point. We got to go a ways to get to them though, by boat and car. This is an adult female, and you notice these barnacles here. This is not just a barnacle. So this is the manatee barnacle. I forget the Latin name, but this is the barnacle that grows on, sea turtle barnacle right here. And then these little snails here, these are the Melampus snails that they eat. Interesting that these snails are here, but they just hang out in these mangrove nematophores, and they feed on the Melampus snails. I did do some trapping with these funnel traps. A lot of turtle researchers will use this trap. This trap is not good for bird rookeries because birds can also go in them. And so I abandoned that right away. They used them at Eckerd College. We used them there for the red-eared slider population there. When we got a river otter in them one day and an alligator. But so I talked to Dr. William Rosenberg, who's a premier terrapin biologist in the country. And again, this is going back to the 1990s, right? So it's been 3 decades. So you've heard that terrapins drown in blue crab traps, right? And blue crab traps are the best way to catch terrapins. So Dr. Rosenberg created a modified blue crab trap that you deploy in shallow water and you tether to a stake. I use rebarb, and that way the terrapins don't drown. And so this is what I did. I built and fabricated. I bought the materials and then fabricated these traps and then deployed them. And I did catch a kingfisher one day, but he got out, no problem. It was fine. This is me in Crystal River area with a couple of females in this trap here. Again, I would use a 5 kilogram block of ground menhaden, and also sometimes a mullet as bait. Now, this is when accidents happen, right? So sometimes, something goes wrong, but sometimes when things go wrong, they actually go right. So one day I was, the tide went out on me. This is the inside of Tarpon Key. So the tide went out. And so I had this like old wooden sailboat, monohull, given to us by our father-in-law with an engine that had literally had duct tape and electrical tape holding the engine together. It had a 2 horsepower motor, very slow. And so the tide went out, and so it was over here. So I had to get out of it. I had to drag the boat to this creek and push it out to get out. But as I'm dragging it and walking, which I never walk in the lagoon, as I'm walking, I stepped on a horseshoe crab. And so I went to pick it up. I went to explore it, pick it up, but it wasn't a horseshoe crab. It was a mangrove terrapin. And I was like, wow, this is really interesting. And I walked a few further steps and stepped on another one. So I immediately realized that they're using the lagoon as a winter hibernaculum, and that's where they're just hanging out some in the winter when it gets cold, and not just the forest. And they were buried; they weren't just sitting on the top. So I got Turtle Bob and Carla to come out with me, and we actually walked the lagoon. We went out during extreme low tide, so we parked the boat on the outside of the island and kind of walked in and went out on a very low tide and just found some of them swimming around, and some of them were kind of in a torpid state where they're kind of partially buried and partially asleep, partially awake, like hibernating. And then some are buried. And we caught 50 that day, 50 terrapins, which is crazy. Most people have never, it's hard to see 50 terrapins in a day. The other thing that happened was I also one day when leaving the island, I knew I couldn't come back for about 3 days. So I think I had 5 or 10 traps, the tall ones. So I pulled all the traps in the boat. I took all the bait out of all the traps, and I drug you see this bank right here? The whole island has a bank around it. So right over here, there's a better bank right here. And this is called the ecotone. The ecotone is the edge of 2 ecosystems, 2 habitats. So this is lagoon, shallow, habitat, and this is the mangrove habitat. So I drug these unbaited traps onto their sides and put them up on the edge under the mangrove, so none of the fishermen would steal them. Sometimes fishermen would come in here, mullet fishermen. So I hid them so they wouldn't steal them. And when I came back 3 days later, there were 2 or 3 terrapins that were in the trap, that there was no bait in the trap. And so I realized through an accident that they were using this ecotone as a highway. This is their little highway. They hang out here, and this is, so that was when I decided to start deploying standard blue crab traps. And with the tidal fluctuations, it's hard to get the tide right? Because it fluctuates with the moon, it gets higher or lower. And so I put in wacky noodles to ensure that there was no mortality. And so I deployed these in shallow water around the edge of them. And sure enough, immediately I was catching terrapins along the little terrapin highway. So very, very cool, very awesome, and a much easier way to find them than spending hours and hours going through spider webs and sinking down into your knees in mud in these mangrove ecosystems. So this is how I would mark them. I would notch them. You notch their marginal scoots with a file. And so 1, 2, 4, 7, and then 10, 20, 40, 70. So if you were to notch 70 and 10, that's 80. And then 2 and 4, that's 6, that's number 86. And you can go all the way up to 999. So that's how I mark them. That's how a lot of people mark them. I did use pit tags for the first 100, but they get expensive. They're the size of a grain of rice, and you would insert them in the back end of them. This shows them notching on them. This was some measuring with calipers down at the Florida Keys Wild Bird Center. And the head width, and the mass in grams. Photo documentation. I took a picture of the plastron, which is the belly, and the carapace, which is the top of the shell, of every terrapin. I am obsessed. And oh my gosh, I used to develop the film and print them, and it was so much. I still have all the pictures. So this just shows their mass in grams, and as you can see, the males are mostly around 400 grams, and the females are mostly around 1,200 grams or 1.2 kilograms. And very, very few, basically no hatchlings or yearlings or juveniles. This is a straight plastron length. Males and females. So the majority, the males are pretty much around 115 millimeters, and the females around 180. This one I like a lot. This is a very interesting slide. So reptiles have an independent growth. Basically, they continue to grow forever. And so that's why the snakes get so big, right? And you hear the stories. But pretty much they put all their energy into growth until they hit sexual maturity. And then once they hit sexual maturity, growth decreases to less than 2% per annum after that. And so several biologists have done this. And so I use their reports where these are age estimates for 111 female terrapins based on sexual maturity at 135 millimeters straight plastron length and less than 2% annual growth thereafter. And so you can see the oldest terrapin was 24 years old based on this estimate, with the average around 17 years old. They take about 5 years before they reach sexual maturity, which is a long time for a turtle. Not as a lot longer for sea turtles, but for a small turtle like this, that's a long time. The males, most of the average male size males were about 12 years old, with the oldest being around 19. This is mass. So back to mass. I love the biodiversity of the tropics. And one of the interesting things is that biodiversity increases at lower latitude. So the higher you are on the Earth, on the altitude latitude wise, the less species diversity you have. The closer to the equator, the more species diversity you have. That's about warmth and sun, right? And annual growth and rain cycles. So pretty much for mammals, mass for all mammals increases at higher latitudes and decreases at lower latitudes. And that's why the puma in Costa Rica is so much smaller than the mountain lion of California. And it's also why the raccoons and the squirrels in Canada are so fat, because they have to survive the winter, and ours down here are a lot smaller. And this was interesting to see that this was Crystal River, this is Tampa Bay, and then Monroe County. And you see they're larger and then smaller and then smaller. This one, I don't know what's going on there, but there's almost no males, very, very few. So that's just kind of a skewed sample. This one, they're larger, but they're being subsidized by fish runoff from a wildlife hospital. So that's one of the reasons that they're actually larger, because they're getting subsidized, that population at least. Sex ratios. So pretty much in the Florida Keys, the sex ratios are 10-to-1 female to male, female bias. So for every 10 you have to find 10 females to find one male. In Tampa Bay, you have to find 2.5 females to find one male. And then in Crystal River, which I believe is probably the most natural study site that I've worked at, that didn't have interference from crabbing and other issues, had a 1-to-1 ratio of male to female. And that's because there's no commercial blue crab activity happening around those islands, because they're just too shallow. At low tide, the grass flats are totally exposed. Catch per unit effort, CPUE. So the easiest way to catch terrapins is in lagoon surveys in the winter during extreme low tides. You can get 2.5 per hour. The mangrove surveys, about 1 every 2 hours through walking, and that's a lot, so many hours in there. And then trapping in traps, 0.013 per hour. I did get 19 in one day in the traps, and that was a stupendous day. A lot of work to process them. I'm going to skip that just because you're getting heavy on the data. Average clutch size in the St. Martin's Keys. We did radiograph the females up there in Martin County and up there in Citrus County, and the clutch sizes range for 22 of them range from 2 to 9, 2 eggs late in the season to 9 early in the season, with an average of 7.1 eggs. And all turtles lay multiple clutches, being 2, 3, or 4 clutches. Some can lay 6 clutches, not terrapins. Soft shells can lay 6 clutches per season. Sea turtles usually 3. But pretty interesting. Morphological variations. So some turtles are very, very consistent in their appearance. This is one location. White head, kind of a leopard head, and then kind of a gray spotted head. Same species, same subspecies, same island. Very, very different looking. These are also both ornate Diamondback terrapin. This is both females, but you see this girl and this girl, just very, very different. 31% of the ones there had this dark carapace versus 70% having this really pretty ornate carapace. Plastrons. Dr. Wood originally back in the 80s and 90s was saying that only the Mangrove Terrapin in the lower Keys had these striped pants. That's not true, in that We've seen other species with them, male subspecies with them, but it's kind of fun to look at that. 13% of these terrapins have the striped pants. Again, all from the same island in Tampa Bay. And they look so different, tremendous morphological variations there. So this female, I thought was hit by a boat, and I was so sad. But then I realized it wasn't a boat at all. Barnacles. Terrapins can get barnacles living in seawater, and barnacles can actually kill them. And so there's actually been papers written on terrapins that have died from barnacle infestations and from them burrowing into their organs through the shell. So very, very strange. Barnacle loads were highest in Tampa Bay, 37%, and lowest in the Florida Keys. I don't know why they were so low down there, around 12% in Crystal River. Being molluscivores, I didn't lavage them, which is to put a tube down their mouth and flush water into their stomach and then have them regurgitate the contents. I would just retain them in a 5-gallon bucket, 1 terrapin per bucket with some salt water that they're in overnight, and then they would pass whatever they digested. And so these are the diets of the females: Atlantic rib mussels. And the males mostly were eating the marsh periwinkles and the Melampus snails. And you can see these little bones here are from the fish and the chum that I had in the traps. This is Turtle Bob with a mangrove water snake. Mangrove water snakes and Gulf salt marsh snakes are also federally threatened species. Very rare, very hard to find because of habitat development and fire ants and other things. These are some of the snakes. This is a mangrove water snake in the Keys. This is in Citrus County. They're just really cool. And we're nearing the end now. Education, conservation, and some new regulations, new meaning the last decade. A lot more conservation going on now, particularly at the Wetlands Institute up in New Jersey. Dr. Wood, he has his interns at the Wetlands Institute actually patrol Cape May, the roads of Cape May in spring and summer, and collect roadkill females, rush them back to the Wetlands Institute, where they will then extract the eggs and incubate them and then hatch. And I believe they still head start the babies, and then they release them. But that just, all those turtles would have been lost had it not been for them intervening there. This is a very, very blurry slide, but the Gulf States Marine Fisheries Commission several years ago, actually 20 years ago, there used to be no annual closure for blue crab fishing. And having no annual closure for blue crab fishing means that there's never a stop, there's never a break for terrapins drowning in this country. And also, since they wanted to do ghost trap cleanups for abandoned traps that were lost, and these are all ghost traps, and ghost traps fish their entire lives, they couldn't do cleanups because they were scared that people would be messing with the fisherman's trap. So then they created a closed season. And only through creating the closed season, the annual closure for the fishery, were they able then to coordinate cleanup events. And through these cleanup events, groups were able to go out and remove thousands and thousands of traps in all these Gulf Coast counties and Gulf Coast states and counties through the derelict crab trap removal program. We have one in Dade County. It happens every year, and every year to this day, the only area they ever find terrapins are down by the Deering Estate and southern Card Sound area, and it's always either a dead one or the disarticulated remains, a shell of one. So very few of those. And these are some of the removal efforts back 18, almost 20 years ago, thousands and thousands of them. It's better now. These are some alive ones in a trap that were saved. That's wonderful. Beautiful. These are males with these little mustaches. These are Mississippi Diamondback terrapins. So the best news of all is that several states now, and for up to 20 years, particularly up in New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, where terrapins are endangered, they require these bycatch reduction devices. And many of you will remember the turtle excluder devices, the TEDs, that they required on the shrimp boats back in the 90s. To make shrimping in the Gulf more sustainable. There's still a lot of bycatch, and that's horrible. But less sea turtles die now because of these turtle excluder devices. And so now they've implemented these bycatch reduction devices, or BRDs, up in the New England states, and Florida has also proposed this and is working on it. And they're actually voting on it this Friday, tomorrow. this Friday. And well, Friday at 5 o'clock, they close for comments. And so I'll share that with you. And if any of you want it, you can email me and I'll send it to you. But they did use my data and some other folks' data, and they're working on in Florida making it illegal to own or possess Diamondback terrapins, and also requiring bycatch production devices in certain areas where there to be known populations and known impacts. I'm going to skip that. This is a hatchling. I don't believe Dr. Wood, I don't believe ever found a hatchling, because Florida Bay, it's almost all mangrove islands. There's very few beaches in Florida Bay and down in the Key West Refuge. And even at high tide, a lot of those berms are covered, inundated at high tide. So he never found a hatchling. Dr. Roger Wood, I don't think he ever found a hatchling. This is one down in the Upper Keys that one of the bird rehabbers there found, and I photographed before we released it. But I'm really excited to share that one of our supporters down in southern Dade County contacted us about some birds, and next thing you know, she's finding terrapins. And so for 2 years now, I've been assisting on a mangrove terrapin research project in Miami-Dade County, where they're primarily locally extinct in Northern Bay, Southern Broward, Central Bay. But near the Deering Estate, there's a property that put up an artificial beach. And during COVID last year was the first time they all slowed down enough, as we all slowed down a bit, to be on that beach. And that's when they started observing female terrapins nesting. And so we were able to screen about 10 nests and monitor them daily. And we were able to collect hatchling data, morphometric data and clutch size on, I believe, 5 nests last year. The average clutch size was 10, and beautiful hatchlings, and got to watch them swim into the bay. And this year, about the same number of nests, but now that people are busier, it's hard. It's a 2-hour drive for me round trip, so it's kind of hard. But we do still have mangrove terrapins in Biscayne Bay, and just a beautiful animal. And maybe one day we'll have one as an education ambassador at Seabird Station, but we're not going to take one out of the wild, obviously. It'll have to come in with an injury, perhaps from a breeder from a different subspecies in Florida. And I love turtles so much, that I used to be one. This is before I came out of my shell, and so I always just kind of show that. But that was a younger me in the Galapagos. But that's it for mangrove terrapins. I know there was a lot, and I know you're probably all turtled out, but yeah, that was it. Any questions?
Joyce wants to know if the lights on the beach has effect on turtles like they do sea turtles.
The answer is yes, because all turtles hatch at night. They can hatch in the daytime if there's a hard rain, because the sand is hot, and so they wait for the sand to cool off to come out. But they can get disoriented, absolutely. There's just so few terrapins in places that have lights anyway, because places that have lights are highly developed. The places that have terrapins still are typically islands offshore. But the Deering they do, and that's mostly a natural mangrove habitat down there.
How many eggs do they lay, and do they lay their eggs on the beach?
So they do lay on the beach, and the clutch size varies. It was 7 to 9, I believe, up in Tampa Bay, Crystal River, and 10, 11 here in Miami-Dade County. And they do have temperature-dependent sex determination, and it's interesting. The hatchlings don't always go straight to the water. They'll actually go and hang out underneath the rack line, the turtle grass and the leaves, the mangrove leaves that fall, the red mangrove leaves that fall, and they'll actually hang out there and for a while. And they even overwinter sometimes up in New England. They overwinter actually kind of underground before actually going into the salt grass and swimming out and foraging and feeding.
And yes, and Joyce wants to know about the sex determination based on temperature. And I think you just touched on that they are dependent on the temperature for whatever sex they're going to be.
Exactly. I don't know the actual number for this species, but it's not too different for all turtles. And above a certain temperature, female, and below a certain temperature, it's male. And climate change is certainly going to have an impact on there. But yeah, turtles are just so interesting. I do want to quickly just show this super quick. This is from my original turtle mentor, George Heinrich, who is the founder of the Florida Turtle Conservation Trust. So the Florida Turtle Conservation Trust supports the Diamondback Terrapin final rule, which is included in the agenda for FWC's commission meeting this weekend on the 15th and 16th. So that's next Tuesday, Wednesday. Banning the take and possession, as well as requiring bycatch reduction devices on recreational crab traps, crab pots. And so that's the letter from them. And I want to share this too. One more thing. This is actually how to reach out. So there's actually a link you can click on, and you can share your comments to, because the commercial fishing company industry, as well as the herp hobby industry, which there's a lot of good people in both industries. I used to be a commercial fisherman, and I was a herp hobbyist as well. Good people with good intentions that don't want this to happen. They want to be able to possess and own terrapins, which and currently you're allowed to have 2 per day. There's old rules on the books that allow you to have 2 per day per person in Florida. So they're trying to update these old laws and make them realistic and sustainable. So if you want to, we can email you this information if we have your email. Hannah, I don't know how to do that. I'll share this link. Let me see if I can. Actually, I'm going to put my email in the chat, and if any of you want this, you can email me. And Hannah, I kind of wish that I had the foresight for us to blast this out to our people. Maybe we can do a social media post about it tomorrow to give people 2 days to kind of convince the commission, the FWC commission, to do this, because they are going to get, and they have. I've been the meeting last year, they got a lot of pushback from the commercial fishermen and from the herp hobbyist industry. So
yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Joyce. We'll definitely do that. And thank you everyone for tuning in and for caring about turtles. And I know it was a lot. I love turtles, and the little people in my life call me a turtleologist, but obviously it's herpetology, it's a study of reptiles and amphibians, and it's my great passion, and Pelican Harbor is too. And I thank you all so much for your support of our nonprofit and for your interest in conservation and in terrapins.